It seems that everything's been ratcheted up around the Charlie Kirk murder and the notion somehow that things that are associated with, well, anything that doesn't really represent flattery toward Charlie Kirk and his legacy can be considered hate speech. Pam Bondi, we were talking about this in the last hour, saying she is going after hate speech. She's, again, sort of in that I'll know it when I see it category. And I'll play you a clip in a moment of Donald Trump going after Jonathan Karl in a one of those gaggle question moments in front of the helicopter as he was talking about maybe I'll go after you, Jonathan Karl. And then the final thing I'll mention, and I'd like to hear your general thoughts, is the move on the part of Donald Trump to sue the New York Times for $15 billion. That was just something announced today. Can you speak to this moment in American history?
Well, Donald, having gotten a good taste of his dictatorship and realizing that on many fronts he's being successful, not all, he's losing most of his court cases, at least at the trial court where they're hearings, they're not trials, and the appellate court level, doing better with the Supreme Court. He's feeling full of himself, and he's just pressing full on ahead, and he's going to continue to do that. And the problem here is that we shouldn't be surprised that corporations are generally wilting in front of him. They are focused on keeping the business entity as healthy as they can and maximizing profits, which is what they're supposed to do. So we're not seeing much courage there. But the Democrats, with a few exceptions, just are not effective in standing up to Donald Trump, and they are not effective in peeling away Republicans who know better and who are, many of the Democrats have said, saying privately, yeah, we know he's crazy. We know he's a megalomaniac. We know he hates democracy. We know he's trying to be dictator, but I don't want to get voted out in the primary. And I mean, this is just a new stage. And we've entered what 2 weeks ago became the murderous stage. We've had now 2 boats off the shore of Venezuela in international waters, blown out of the water, killing a total of, we believe, 14 people. The appropriate lawful action when you think there's a boat with drugs on the high seas is you send out the Coast Guard, or if you can't do otherwise, the Navy, and you interdict the boat. You get on the boat. You find drugs, or if they throw them overboard, you send divers into the water and swimmers into the water, and then you arrest these people. We will never know whether this was something other than what they say because the boat's at the bottom of the ocean. And there will be more murders, and that's what these were. Donald Trump is now a murderer. There is no official act authorizing him to take a boat that, by his account, had drugs on it, headed to the U.S., and kill the people on the boat. That is not covered by the immunity of the U.S. Supreme Court because that's not an official act. Murder is not an official act. And Donald Trump has been filled with thoughts of murder for years. I mean, remember, he took out 5 full-page ads in newspapers, identical ads in 5 papers, that the Central Park 5, ultimately found to be totally innocent, should be summarily executed without trial. And when they were proven to be innocent and the actual perpetrator was caught, Trump was like, no, we should still execute them. I mean, this is what happens to someone who has no moral principles and has this taste of power. And let me go back to a previous president about this. During the debate in the 2000 election with Al Gore, George W. Bush brought up a man who had been a black man in Texas who'd been grabbed by some racists. They had chained him to the back of a pickup truck and dragged him on a dirt road till he was dead. And George Bush said, we're going to execute those people. And he did it with a smirk on his face. This was in the September of 2000. I mean, it was once he talked about executing these guys, there was a smirk. There was a woman who was sentenced to be death in Texas, who had undergone, apparently by all accounts, quite a conversion in her life, and who had had a horrible, terrible upbringing that should have been a mitigating factor in whether she got life in prison or the death penalty. And again, George W. Bush happily, and I do mean happily, signed her death warrant. And this happens. I mean, we know that lots of people, there's lots of research that many people would like the opportunity to commit violence against other people. They just don't want to pay the price for it. They don't want to go to prison. They don't want to have their liberties taken away. And who's going to stand in the way now of Donald Trump? He's got a completely corrupt Justice Department. So this is going to get worse, and it is a very, very bad sign for whether we will sink into an unrecoverable dictatorship. And look at the other people here. J.D. Vance and his inflammatory comments, this notion that you must treat Charlie Kirk as he's some kind of a martyr and a saint. Charlie Kirk was out promoting hatred, calling for stoning people to death. You know, women need to stop getting educations, and they should essentially, not, my words, not his, be barefoot and pregnant. We're really in a very bad zone, and we've shifted very quickly. And that's how things like this tend to happen. You know, they're like glaciers. They move a little bit, and all of a sudden the pressure comes and boom, they move a lot. And that's what we're seeing right now.
So much you just said. I want to double back and just ask you about one thing you referenced, which is the notion that the president in this case wouldn't be, in the case of the Venezuelans, wouldn't be covered by the immunity that was laid down by the Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Why, because it's not an official act. Why is it not an official act, David?
Because the president has no authority to summarily murder people. He can order actions which in a battlefield situation result in deaths.
He can't order that boat taken out?
No, absolutely not. That is murder. And by the way, I'm not the only one saying this. Some retired judge advocate generals have said this. There are other lawyers who've said it. We have a system for extrajudicial killings. So someone takes a hostage and they're holding a gun to their head, and the police decide a sniper, even though the person's right next to him, is good enough, he can hit him right in the forehead with a bullet. They can take him out because there's an immediate danger to the life of the innocent person. That's an example of an extrajudicial killing. But what Trump did here, by his own account, is absolutely not the case. And furthermore, ask yourself this question. We had, it would take probably 2 days for that boat to reach the shores of the United States from Venezuela. The Caribbean is not exactly a lake. And we had plenty of time to go out and interdict the boat. Why didn't we do that? Why do you jump immediately to the worst possible, most violent possible, and irrecoverable action instead of any other option you have? And that goes to the fact that Donald Trump has no idea what he's doing. He is a mentally ill man with no moral principles, with no real philosophy except me, who has these awesome powers. And bit by bit, he is becoming more comfortable with using these powers, and he has around him people like Stephen Miller. And if you listen very carefully to what Stephen Miller said to Sean Hannity the other night, it's very revealing. He said he essentially went into this diatribe that is now the mantra of the administration. The left is promoting violence. If you're a liberal, you're part of a terrorist organization, and the universities are behind this, and George Soros and the Ford Foundation, and they are all promoting murderous terrorism. And then what Miller said, and I call him Trump's minister of hate, was, we're going to take your job, we're going to take your money, and then we're going to use the law. Now think about that order of events. Not, we're going to find a legal way to remove you from your job. We're going to sue you to get your money. No. We're going to take those things. That's what dictators can do. And then we're going to use the law against you to lock you up. This is a lawless, pro-criminal, murderous administration. And don't lose sight ever, folks, of Donald Trump pardoned the guy who ran Silk Road, the biggest enabler of drug traffickers in the world. I'm sorry, he pardoned him, but he's taking out this boat with supposed drugs on it. He has pardoned sexual predators. That one should really shock us because, of course, Donald Trump is the most morally pure person we know who would never speak about or joke about being a predator on the Howard Stern show and having sex with girls as long as they're more than 12 years old. He has pardoned all sorts of people who were found guilty of financial crimes. So now they don't have to pay the money back. By the way, he'll never pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. He'll give her clemency if he decides to act, because if she is granted a pardon, she no longer has Fifth Amendment protections for anything she did. And she can be ordered to answer questions by Congress or by a court. And if she doesn't answer them, she can be held in contempt and she can be prosecuted if she lies. If she's given clemency, she can respond to any question by saying, on the advice of counsel, I'm invoking my right under the Fifth Amendment to not make statements that might incriminate me, which everybody has a right to do and they should do. Although I'd point out that Donald Trump, who took it many, many times in a deposition, I think he's taken it more than 400 times, if memory serves, always used to say, well, if you take the Fifth Amendment, it means, of course, you were guilty, which is nonsense.
Yeah, he'll always invoke whatever in that moment, to make whatever point he wants to make in that moment. Something showed up in the chat during the time that you were speaking, and it's irrelevant to what we're talking about now, because you're talking about kind of doing things outside of the law, that there's this new sense, and I think it's a flex. I'd include, by the way, the Venezuela thing. I think the release of that snuff film sort of video of the ship being blown up with the people on board, I mean, that is to me, a flex. It's a way of saying, hey, we're tough mother effers. Stay out of it. We're serious about everything we say, and we don't care about the stuff that might restrain us from a legal perspective. But it's all of a kind, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And the Miller speech.
I don't want to show the video of Charlie Kirk being hit by a bullet, because that would be morally offensive. I mean, the double standards and the inconsistencies here, you'll never be able to untangle them.
So someone was asking about Kristi Noem, because I was mentioning before we joined you that Kristi Noem is making the point that anyone who interferes with ICE operations in any way, and that includes the videoing of any of these ICE operations, they will be prosecuted as a felon. And what was asked in the chat, and I think it's pertinent, is can she do that? Does she have the legal power to, in essence, as a result of this declaration, maintain legally that you are now committing a felony if you video an ICE operation?
Well, she doesn't have that authority. That would be the Justice Department. But Pam Bondi, who is an utterly corrupt person, who was the Attorney General of Florida during many of Epstein's rapes, and presumably rapes by other powerful and wealthy men around Epstein, and who took a $25,000 campaign contribution from the Trump Foundation and said that was okay when it absolutely was not, and shut down the investigation of Trump University. She's not going to stand in the way of anything like that. And what really is going on is they don't want a record of their misconduct. I mean, I wish somebody, and the people who are listening, if you know somebody who has the time and the capacity to do this, there are a whole lot of videos that I've seen snippets of out there from police body cams that have been obtained from ICE or police departments, from dashboard cameras and cell phones, of ICE agents being told, I'm an American citizen. Let me get you my enhanced driver's license. You can't get an enhanced driver's license without proving you're an American citizen. I have one because we're near the Canadian border and I don't want to have to carry my passport all the time. And the ICE agents say things to the effect of, we don't care. And they don't want those kinds of videos out there. That's what's going on. They want video that shows what they want people to see, and they want to control what you see. And they have really apparently been quite successful in getting CBS, now effectively owned by Larry Ellison of Oracle's son, David, to knuckle under. I tape all three network shows at night. I watch one and then race through the other two to see what I want to see repeated. And if anybody has been pulling their punches and going out of their way to not upset Donald Trump, it's the CBS Evening News. Now, maybe I just saw 4 or 5 days that were unfavorable and there was less than great writing on it, but I'm going to keep watching for this.
Well, I want to mention the fact that I may be wrong about something. It's interesting. I always felt that just as the Vietnam War brought home in pictures the brutality and uh, the utter horror that was the Vietnam War in a
Right.
way that Americans recoiled and became angry about. Um, I thought that the videoing of ICE detainees and the ICE maneuvers, I thought because it's done with such brutality and as you suggested, without regard to anything that anyone is saying, and the separation of families, it's all done, as I say, with brutality. It seems as an essential element in it. I
Right.
thought that those videos would have the same kind of effect, that they would have their own chilling effect on people's support of these ICE agents doing these things in all of these different places, many critical to the American economy, agriculture, hospitals, high school graduations, etc. But what Noam's doing is she's blunting Americans' ability to video and record these pictures and communicate them to the public at large. So maybe my sense that this would have a chilling effect, it may be wrong, because ultimately we may never see these pieces of video.
It won't have a chilling effect if they are able to control, by and large, the images and make sure the only images that go out are the ones that they want. Now, in this case of police were going to go into Chicago, and I'm not police, I'm sorry, ICE and military were going to go into Chicago. Some ICE there, but not what Trump had said, where he basically said he was going to declare war on the third largest city in the country. Governor Pritzker has stood up very much to them, but he said at a press conference the other day that basically, we can't interfere with federal law enforcement operations. Well, I agree with him about that, but here's what I think you can do, and you certainly can reasonably test this. When people without insignia in rented cars from Enterprise show up with their masks and try to grab somebody, it's more than reasonable for uniformed police to go over and demand identification, to hold them up while they get a check with superiors, because for all they know, these are kidnappers. And we have had now several verified cases of people who went, oh, here's a chance to kidnap young women and rape them or kidnap other people. And so that's something that cities could be doing. You've got to have very disciplined officers to do this. You're not going to send your average street cop to do this. But Chicago has a team like the Metro Squad at LAPD. And there's no reason, in my view, you can't stop, question, demand identification, and hold up the proceeding until you've established that this has been authorized by getting senior level people there. And that would have a very beneficial effect. And at the same time, the police have the capacity to make their own video record, not only body cams, but every big police department has people who are professional videographers and photographers.
That latter point might be super relevant, because I think the former point runs up against the same power of this administration that regular old Americans run into. In other words, sure, police officer 5301, if you want to record that, you will be facing the full wrath of the American government right now, because we view you as someone who should not be participating in recording our ICE agents' maneuvers and detaining of anybody who we believe shouldn't be in this country. But my point is,
and let me just, because I know somebody will think this in the thing. Well, you're interfering in a federal operation. You're not going to let the person they want to grab go. You're going to hold them there with local police while you sort this out. You're probably going to interrogate that person. And if they say, I'm an American citizen, then the officers can rightfully say, if this person is an American citizen, you have no right to arrest them. We propose that we're going to put this person in our patrol car. You come with us in your vehicle to their residence. They say they have a passport and they will get it and show it to you. That's another way to lawfully not allow what are, for all practical purposes, federal kidnappings of people.
I mean, the whole thing is made even darker when you add the masks, you add no markings. The entire thing is just, we've gotten to a very, very dark place so quickly, David,
Well, enormous numbers of Americans do not understand the principles of our legal system. I was teaching today my first lecture to my law class on the criminal justice system. And I start off with Hammurabi's Code and the principles that exist in the law today that you can trace to just short of 4,000 years ago, about, not making false claims, finding witnesses, the power to call people as witnesses, a social insurance aspect. If you were robbed in ancient Sumer and your local court, because it was a theocracy, your local religious institution didn't have the money to reimburse you and they couldn't find the robber, the community was taxed to make the person whole. Everybody had to contribute a little bit. And one of the most important principles in criminal justice is due process. And just grabbing people off the street and making life so miserable they'll sign anything, and then taking someone who came here from Central America and sending him to Uganda. This is totally outside of thousands of years of diplomatic and international practice, and in the more modern world, literally law. We're behaving more like the Russians. The Russians, all the way back to the era of the boyars, those were the nobles of pre-communist Moscow, they paid no attention to the kinds of rules of law that the British and the Germans and the French and Italians and Americans and Spanish paid attention to. They have always gone and attacked civilians, done as we're seeing in Ukraine, intentionally attacking obstetric hospitals where babies are being born, old folks' homes, because the Russian culture supports and allows this kind of terroristic approach to things. And yeah, we're seeing a huge collapse of this, but a lot of that's because people don't know this. We're not doing a good job of transmitting down through the younger generations. And I hate to sound like, in the good old days, because it wasn't the good old days. But the reason people rose up against the Vietnam War was this recognition that, wait a minute, what is our national interest here? Why are we doing this? Why are we impressing young men into service to go do this? When Cy Hirsch broke the story of the My Lai massacre, where Lieutenant William Calley had a whole village of people, men, women, and children, pulled out of their huts and murdered, that touched the conscience of a lot of people. But a great many people in this country who, A, don't understand the principles, and B, and this is the more troubling part, they're angry about the terrible economics they're living under that I've been writing about for at least 30 years. And they want to hit somebody. That's why you have these pastors who've stepped forward and said, my flock is saying, we don't want to hear this Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek. We want Donald Trump's gospel. Hit him in the face and hit him again and hit him again. And that's not Christianity for starters, but it's a terrible indication of where we are as a society.
That anger is, it's played out in a lot of what's happening now. Play for David, if you would, a little of the exchange between Donald Trump and Jonathan Karl. Karl was there asking him about the situation. Of course, Trump's in the UK at this point. Go ahead, Tony, please.
That'll come to a vote, but we'll see what happens. And what do you make Pam Bondi saying she's going to go after hate speech? Is that, a lot of your allies say hate speech is free speech.
We'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC. Well, ABC paid me $16 million recently for a form of hate speech, right? Your company paid me $16 million for a form of hate speech. So maybe they'll have to go after you. Look, we want everything to be fair. It hasn't been fair. And the radical left has done tremendous damage to the country. But we're fixing it. We have right now the hottest country anywhere in the world. And remember, 1 year ago, our country was dead. And now Washington, D.C. is fixed, and I fixed it. The mayor was fine. The mayor was just fine, okay? The mayor had the sick city for many years. He's been mayor for many years. The one that fixed it was me and my people, and it is so safe. You should take your beautiful wife tonight and have dinner down there. You won't
Okay,
be
thank
shot.
you, Tony.
won't
That,
be
and then he
accosted.
goes into what he's going to do in Chicago, and he's going to clean up that city, and everything's so great. And yeah, I mean, it's
I
so.
can't not
yeah.
laugh. That is so delusional, and it is so classic Donald. You know, life, whatever he says, that's the truth. And if you don't buy it, well, fake news. And yeah, he got paid $16 million of extortion, criminal extortion. You will give me this money or I will not approve your business deal. I will threaten to take away your licenses, and now you'll really be in trouble because you're going to lose your broadcast licenses unless you do what I say. This is a dictator. We have a dictator in the White House. He hasn't fully consolidated power, but he's moving real fast.
It's so alarming, you know, David. I'm astounded that we've gotten here so quickly. But as you say, it's not completely consolidated. It would seem as though the courts may be the final bit of consolidation. And I'm wondering if you have a notion about the Supreme Court and if there's anything on the docket that we should pay particular attention to, because it would seem as though that's like the last bulwark.
Yeah. Well, the single biggest problem we're having with the Supreme Court is right now is the use of the so-called shadow docket. That is, emergency orders are brought up. The X is about to happen, and we need the Supreme Court to act right now at 10 o'clock at night. And there's a different justice assigned for each part of the country for this. And the court then, without explanation, without guidance, has issued a variety of orders. And I think it's very clear that for sure, 3 members of the court will give Donald just about anything he wants. That's Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh. Amy Coney Barrett is proving a little bit of an enigma. I think she's thought about her place in the world somewhat. And Gorsuch is a man who I've written about in the past. His jurisprudence is very literalist and harsh, but he does have a set of principles. Obviously, Clarence Thomas and Alito have no set of principles. They just want to tamp down people they don't like. So the shadow docket is one problem. The second is how the court, by saying things like, well, we're going to allow the litigation to go forward, but in the meantime, you're fired. I'm sorry, that's a complete disadvantage to the party who, at the end of the day, may be shown to be wronged. What you normally do is say you can stay in your position in the federal government while we litigate this, which of course also then encourages the Trump administration to speed up their actions. Instead, they're encouraging them to slow down their actions. And the Supreme Court majority, the 6, are clear enablers here. This is not new in American history. Most people don't appreciate this, but the court has always been behind where the public is, with the one exception, and that was the Earl Warren Court, Republican governor of California, district attorney of San Francisco, who had a social conscience. And with the exception of the Warren Court, the court's always been retrograde to the rest of society. Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and other decisions. This really, though, is a ballot box issue at the end of the day. That's why they're redrawing. Maybe they've already enacted the law, the map in Texas to eliminate Jasmine Crockett from Congress. They're in Missouri and some other states trying to do this, and California has come back, and New York, which is much, much more complicated and takes another election cycle, have come back and said, well, if you're going to do this gerrymandering, we're going to do it. We have to. At least in those 2 cases, the Democrats aren't, as the saying goes, bringing a knife to a gunfight. But this is, you want to live in a free country, this is the time you need to act. And if you're not willing to step forward yourself, and I understand why a lot of people wouldn't, find other ways to do things. You can contribute to political campaigns. You can encourage other people around you to discuss these matters. Find things you can do, and especially encourage people like Governor Pritzker and Governor Newsom to say, why don't you get your lawyers together and think about creative ways that without interfering in federal operations, you can protect the people of your communities and make sure if they're being arrested, they're properly arrested. And that would allow them, of course, to, among other things, require these masked goons, and that's what they are, to identify themselves by name, rank, and serial number. The idea that law enforcement doesn't have to identify themselves in arrests by name, rank, and serial numbers is absurd. And also the people who've just disappeared into the system. We now know from a couple of people who've been released that they've been giving them what used to be called diesel therapy. You put them on these chartered planes and you move them from one prison to another so you can say, I don't know where they are, a trick the cops pull in big cities. You're the defense lawyer, Mark, and you go and say, hey, my client, Mr. Johnston, you arrested him. I'm here to see him. And they go, no, he's not here. And they just put me in squad cars and move me from one station to another so that they can say, no, he's not here. That's what they're doing. That's an old law enforcement trick. It's disreputable, and it's too bad we don't have a court case that flat out says from 50 years ago, you may not do that.
It's a remarkable thing, David. It's a remarkable thing. And just to hear even you describe all of these different areas in which America as we've known it, and we've known it to be corrupt in many ways. We've known it to be flawed in many ways. I mean, just unequal in many ways. I mean, there are all, America with all its warts, that America still seems to be lost to the past with this.
Well, we've replaced the preamble to our Constitution, "We the people," with "I, the Donald, declare," and that will not just end with Donald. I mean, if Donald is voted out of office, if Donald's health forces him from office, that will not be the end of this. We have now given permission first to people to say horrible, racist, misogynistic, vile things, given them permission. And now, of course, Donald is blaming everybody else, people who behaved less badly than he has by the worst possible version of this. It's all their fault. And, you know, we had Sean Duffy, the absolutely incompetent transportation secretary, say that what's happened is that the universities have turned all these young people, you know, into violent radical leftists. I'm paraphrasing him, but that's the ballpark he was certainly in. And people aren't pushing back with that. You know, and what I see on the universities where I've taught and ones I've visited and gone to is a lot of robust discussion. Does it tend to not be the kind of discussion Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Miss Noem would like? Yeah, because it tends to be about inquiry and thought and how did you come to that and what's optimal and what's the historic precedent, as opposed to, you will do it this way. It's my way or the highway.
It's extraordinary. The last thing I'll say just on the way out, David, is that, you know, I think the media is relevant to a lot of what you're talking about, you know, coverage and, as you say, protest, pushback, reaction. These are all things that are covered in the media, you know, the outrage, public outrage, political outrage, et cetera. It has to get some media oxygen. Otherwise, there's just no way to get the information out to enough people. And one of these instruments is TikTok. And we could see this one coming, you know, down the 405 freeway. You knew that when there was pushback on TikTok, that it would be gifted ultimately by the Trump people to a friend of Trump. Larry Ellison now likely to get control of TikTok. They will dry clean it of anything that goes against the regime's view of the world. They're talking about getting rid of all politics and news on TikTok, but maybe it will be repopulated with a certain type of politics and news. This, again, is control of information.
Right. And that's one of the key things that they want to have. And we still don't have a clear-headed understanding by major news organizations of how to deal with Donald Trump. And there's a fundamental way to do this called a truth sandwich. So Donald Trump just said something utterly ridiculous. He does it every day. You don't report it and then take it apart. What you do is say, Donald Trump said something today that has no known connection to reality. That focuses the mind of the reader or the listener or the viewer. Then you quote what he said, and if necessary, quote him at some length. And then you start to take it apart. But if you start off with his assertion, that becomes the point from which human minds work. Most of us are not raised to analyze and scrutinize comments and statements. It's just not how we live our lives. There are people like investigative reporters who do that, detectives who do it, political scientists, but it's not the norm among the populace. So you have to communicate with people in a way that makes sense to them. And this lawsuit against the New York Times, there are going to be more lawsuits like this. First of all, you can claim any amount of damages you want.
And just to remind everybody, or those who don't know, this is about the inclusion in an article of the birthday card that Trump had that the Times reprinted.
Right. And
the birthday card to Einstein,
the Wall Street Journal, and it's also about the book by Suzanne Craig and Ross Buettner. And for those who may not know, I used to be a New York Times reporter. The newsroom lawyers are not worried about this case. It's going to make work for them. It's going to divert a little bit in resources by hiring outside lawyers. But this is just harassment by Donald Trump. And remember, Donald Trump has said for many years, it should be against the law to write anything about me that I don't approve of. That's about as Stalinist, Maoist as it gets. And the parallels that you can draw between Maoism, Stalinism, and Putinism today are astonishing in terms of how Donald is doing things. Fascist regimes, and most people don't know what the word fascist means, so using that in the news media is not useful. Authoritarian dictatorships of the kind we've seen in the last literally 100 years, because Mussolini's party started out in the 1920s. What they have in common is the leader is surrounded by family, cronies, and incompetents who pledge total loyalty to him. That's exactly what we're seeing here. The instruments of government that make economies work don't continue to work as they did. They become less efficient, and ultimately lots of sand gets in the gears. It's a lie that the trains ran on time when Mussolini was dictator. They did not. And that's what we're seeing here. And putting out false information. Donald has said repeatedly in the last few years, everybody knows prices are down. I'm sorry, you're going to believe yourself or the stickers underneath the items of food at the grocery store? Crime has just taken over these cities. No, it hasn't. And if you take a 50-year perspective or a 40-year perspective on crime, crime is way down. I mentioned, I think, on an earlier show that when I was investigating the LAPD in the early 1980s, there were 1,000 murders a year. Now there's 300. It's just absurd to make the claims he's making. He's only making them to further what he wants, and that's absolute power. Remember, he said, when Kim Jong-un walks into a room, everyone stands up and applauds. And that's what I want my people to do. My people.
I sadly think that he's a bit drunk on the power. That's the way you started this conversation. I think you're right.
Yes, he's drunk with power, and he's going to get a lot drunker. Hopefully he passes out before we do.
Thank you, David. Thanks for staying a few minutes overtime with us, too. I appreciate it. David K. Johnston, all the best. We'll talk next Tuesday.
See you next week.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.